Welcome back to World Talks on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman. About a third of the positions in the cabinet of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy are now vacant as high-ranking ministers leave their leadership positions. One of the big names to depart his post is Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba, who is the best-known face of Ukraine overseas. It all comes as part of the biggest Ukrainian cabinet reshuffle since Russia's invasion more than 2 years ago. So, what does this mean for the future of the war in Ukraine? Joining me now is Marta Prochwicz, Deputy Head of Office and Policy Fellow at the European Council of Foreign Relations. Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Good to meet you.
Now, Marta, we're getting the latest as it comes to hand, and Ukrainska Pravda claims that the most likely successor of Kuleba is Andrii Sybiha, the first Deputy Head of the Foreign Ministry. Just firstly, what is your response to that?
Well, first of all, those are still speculations, so it's very hard to comment on them. That's what we've been hearing, absolutely, and I think that if that were the case when it comes to Polish-Ukrainian relations, that's a very good development because he's somebody who's actually been in Poland, speaks the language, was based here in Warsaw, and when it comes to those bilateral relations, that will be a very good development. When it comes to Ukraine's position in the world, it will be a sort of continuation of the politics of Kuleba because he was his deputy for a very long time and also very close to Zelenskyy.
Yeah, talk to me a little bit about that Poland-Ukraine relationship. Much has been made here in Poland of Kuleba's recent comments about the Wołyń massacre. Do you think that if Sybiha ends up taking this role, that he'll have a different approach to Poland? And do you feel like that Kuleba leaving has any connection at all to those comments he made last week?
First of all, I strongly disagree that the comments have anything to do with his departure. I think we're being very narrow-minded when you think about that way, thinking that our interests really do have that big of an influence. There's so much more at play. So that's one thing. And when it comes to the relations between Poland and Ukraine, I think that we may be witnessing a big improvement of those because personalities do matter, whether we like it or not, and that will probably have a very good effect.
If we do rewind just a little, can you provide a bit more context for those that perhaps haven't kept up with every single development in this saga? Can you provide a little bit more context about Dmytro Kuleba's resignation?
Well, first of all, it's part of a bigger government reshuffle, like you mentioned in the beginning. It's something that has been announced by the president for a longer time, so it was not a surprise to anybody at all. And in view of the fact that Ukraine is, of course, in a state of war for 3 years and that it did not have an election in the period, during this period, although normally, according to the law, it should have. I think that the reshuffle is definitely an important step towards rethinking the way that Ukraine positions itself and the type of governmental institutions that it has.
What do you think prompted him to step down at this critical time in Ukraine?
Well, it may have something to do with how important the situation in the front line is. So obviously we know that right now Ukraine has began an incursion for 3 weeks now into Russia, which is an important development, a very unexpected one, of course. And at the same time, Russia has not stepped down its efforts in the Donbass and continues to have a stronghold there and make important advances. Now, it's very, obviously, we've said this a lot throughout the last 3 years that we're at a crossroads, but we'll continue to say it because we really do think that every step of the war is important. Now, the Russians are coming very close to overtaking an important city of Pokrovsk, and if that happens, it would sort of make difficult the logistical supplies and perhaps even have impact on the Donbass entirely. So therefore, the front line kind of dictates, the military situation dictates what needs to happen on the political level. And of course, the big picture here is that we're approaching the US election in November, and that will have a major impact on US foreign policy and therefore, as a consequence, on Ukraine.
How significant do you think a difference will there be depending on whether Kamala Harris or Donald Trump take office?
Well, I think I might surprise you with this, but not that big of a difference. On the surface, of course, the rhetoric is entirely different, and we're talking day and night here. And the way that Donald Trump has talked about Ukraine has shocked us. He said that he would want to resolve the conflict within 48 hours, and he would probably have a very strongman approach to it, sitting everybody down at the table, making sure that the ones who have to be there are there, Putin and Zelenskyy. Now, Harris, on the other hand, will to a large degree be a continuation, from what we can gather, of President Biden's administration. She is, of course, the vice president. But at the same time, it's been a while in the making that President Biden has actually been thinking about changing his policy towards Ukraine. And I think that we may witness a large surprise for us, that she will want to link the incremental weapons deliveries to a push of Ukraine thinking about potential settlement as well.
When it comes to Ukraine using NATO weapons, for example, on Russian territory, how difficult is this balancing act between fighting a war and then that fine line of diplomacy?
It's extremely difficult, not only the fine line of fighting a war and making sure that you're fighting corruption, that you're maintaining the society, and that you're reforming your country, that you're doing all the reforms necessary to enter the EU potentially, and NATO reforms, so restructuring your armies. That's already a fine line that they're walking. But the fact that they're receiving weapons in order to defend themselves, but they're not able to attack the positions from which they're being bombarded and attacked within Russia is just exacerbating. And it's been very frustrating for the Ukrainians, and also from the Polish perspective, and the eastern flank countries are in line with the Ukrainian perspective here. But these weapons do come with strings attached. And while some of these weapons do not have restrictions on the use of them, things that go into Russia have been there have been prevarications from the side of the Western allies as to how far they can reach into Russia. So 80 kilometers has been permitted. Now the 300 that they want to go in for deep strikes, to really strike those targets that are that are attacking them from inside Russia, has been a red line from the side of the Western allies, because of the fear of escalation from a nuclear-armed Russia.
We've also seen in recent days devastating Russian attacks on the Ukrainian cities of Lviv and Poltava. Why do you think this offensive is happening now, and have you seen a change in approach from Russia?
I wouldn't say it's a change of approach, because we've seen this type of escalation several times over the war, but I do think that it's definitely a type of vengeance that the Russians are executing right now on the Ukrainians, due to the fact that they haven't been able to amass, or decided not to amass, the necessary forces in order to push the Ukrainians out of Russia. So it's a signal. It's a signal that the Russians are sending to the West to say, well, yes, the rhetoric around this Ukrainian incursion into Russia, has sent a signal that Ukraine is capable of going into Russia, and Russia is weak. So they're sending a signal back. They're saying, well, as hard as you try to show our weaknesses, we're still able to show the Ukrainians our upper hand.
Now, reports last night showed that German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, he says Germany won't let up in its military aid to Ukraine. What do you make of that? And was there ever any doubt of Germany's support?
Germany's support has very much changed throughout the last more than 2 years. At the beginning, there was a lot of criticism towards Germany. Then Germany became the second largest donor country to Ukraine, right after the United States. So that has been a massive turn, and I really do think that I know that the Ukrainians appreciate this help very much. Recently, there's been a lot of problems around the budgetary situation in Germany, and that military budget, the foreign aid for Ukraine, will probably be affected by the internal budgetary situation. But it's a strong signal that Olaf Scholz says that he will continue to support Ukraine militarily, because they're a very important ally, and within the European Union, it's important that they continue to send this message.
And of course, you mentioned the budget here in Poland. There's been a decision to ramp up defence spending to 4.7% of GDP. Also, at the major defence expo in Kielce, our reporters have been there, and the government's declared it will build a new ammunition factory on Polish soil. Do you think both of these things are positive moves?
Absolutely. I do think that they're positive moves, because we are in a situation of a war that is happening next door, and Poland itself is in a hybrid war with Russia. We're being attacked constantly by not just disinformation from the Russian and the Chinese side. There are cyber attacks in Poland, so it's not a direct war, but it's definitely a hybrid war, the Belarusian border as well. So the fact that the Polish society supports this ramping up is an extremely important signal, not just in terms of the fact that we need to defend ourselves in the potential of a threat from Russia, but it's an important signal to allies as well, allies within Europe, and to the United States as well, which has been carrying the burden that the message is it's not just the Americans that are shouldering this burden of supporting the Ukrainians. The Eastern flank countries are definitely in the forerunners here.
You mentioned allies. With so much change in Ukraine at the moment, and particularly at the top, how do you think those resignations and that change of cabinet for Volodymyr Zelenskyy will impact the relationship with allies or with partners?
That's a good question. I think that the current government, and especially Dmytro Kuleba and Olga Stefanishnya, who is one of the ministers who has resigned, have built very good networks and connections. They've been very present, and a lot of their work was based on them traveling and being this diplomatic face, which they've been doing a tremendous job at. Not just Zelenskyy was doing it, but they were doing it as well. So that's a disadvantage. The new folks will have to build these new relationships anew. At the same time, the relations between Ukraine and other allies are not just built on these particular personalities. It's the nation, actually, that counts, and the nation being Ukrainians, and how Ukrainians abroad represent their nation, and how incredible they have been in fighting and sustaining this spirit, this willingness to fight. That's what makes the diplomacy of Ukraine so amazing to the West. So it's not just these personalities, and I don't think that will be affected by a change in these people, in these figures.
Marta Prochwicz, Deputy Head of Office and Policy Fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
And that's World Talks, another episode rather of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman. Don't go anywhere. Stay with us. Bye for now.